Welcome back to another episode of Conservative Conversations with your hosts, Reid and Frank. How are you today, Frank?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty good also, and glad to be getting back to it after our little vacation.
Yes, we did just have a nice holiday, didn't we?
Sure did. It was good to get away for a bit.
I had 2 weeks off.
Oh, you lucky dog.
I know, I had 2 weeks. I think you only had the one, didn't you?
Yep, only had my 1 week off, but that's alright. It was a good time.
Yes, it was nice to spend a little bit of it with you, and I know we got some good additional future content for the listeners out of it, so that'll be good to look forward to.
That's right. Well, let's get started with our show today. I had a quick question that I wanted to kind of pick your brain about. I was taking a survey for Lyft the other day, the rideshare company. I'm sure most people know.
Mm-hmm.
And they were mostly asking about like uh, how I think I'll be using rideshare or other transportation in the next 3 months, and how I think the next 3 months looks for COVID and stuff like that. But near the end, they got to like the demographic type of questions, and of course, like pretty much all surveys, they ask for your race and or ethnicity, and it all of a sudden occurred to me, why does it matter? I mean, I'm sure they'd like to know, and I'm sure there's some uses for them to have that data, but especially in this whole, now when we're talking about critical race theory and people complaining about white supremacy and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to walk around as a conservative, saying that race doesn't matter, and why do I need to go ahead and tell Lyft I'm a white person taking their survey? So I thought to myself that I'll go ahead and just pick prefer not to answer. And then I wondered if this could be something that some more people start doing. Uh, Maybe other conservatives have had this thought before. And I wanted to get your opinion, what you think about it when you see that kind of question on a survey or application or whatever it may be.
Well, I'm sure that people have thought about that question before because, I mean, we've been seeing it forever since grade school. I mean, on the old
Mm-hmm.
AC, I mean, excuse me, I had to take the old SAT 9, the SAT 9
Sure.
in elementary school. And then it was the West test, where we went up through in West Virginia. And we had to take those standardized tests pretty often, and they're even right on there. So coming up through school, you have to self-identify on those things. And that's why I think they're allowed to get away with it, because I do think it's pretty much, covertly racist. But since it's just an open-ended question
Mm-hmm.
where people self-identify, I think they're allowed to get away with doing that and having those types of metrics, even though I think they're
Sure.
obviously wrong. And one just little example, like I'm citing to you from my own personal life, I've seen in my with my own eyes where they don't include prefer not to identify as a category. So that's not even an
Mm-hmm.
option, and you have to pick a race. And what I think is funny is, some people, let me just put it to you this way, some people Christmas tree those tests, if you know what I mean. So when it comes to the race question, what if you just treat it the same? What if you identify as black when you're not? Or you put on there that you're, American Samoan when you're not, and you're just horsing around and you're not taking it seriously. I think that's important to realize is those metrics are already going to be off. So
Right.
I don't know how good they even are. I don't see why there is that question. I think it's absolutely preposterous.
Sure. And I had recently done a phone survey too, and I know that they asked the same thing. And, you know, not to be stereotypical, but sometimes you can tell people's races by their voice. And I could tell the lady I was, well, I shouldn't say I could tell, but I presumed or assumed she was a black lady. And when she got to that question, I actually kind of felt awkward having to answer it. I don't know really why, but I just did. And that was before I took the lift survey. And then I decided, you know, during that lift survey that I'm probably not going to answer the question. If they have the prefer not to answer option on surveys like that, I'm going to start picking that.
Well, and I figure a good number of people do. And just because a fair number of people do, I don't think it makes the other answers accurate. You know, just because they have that choice. I mean, you might have somebody who identifies. I mean, and especially, I mean, I know I use this phrase a lot. I know I've said it on the channel before. But in this postmodern, pick your own future type of, or excuse me, pick your own reality type of world that we're living in right now, people identify as all kinds of stuff. You know, there was that story of the girl who was, I think she was like president of the NAACP, and it turned out she was a white woman. So there's people who identify as things, and that doesn't really mean anything. You're asking for somebody to self-identify. So I don't think it's really going to fit scientific definitions, for these categories. The way a scientific mind might categorize somebody might be way different than how they self-identify.
Yep, totally. So I thought that was just kind of something interesting that popped in my head that I thought I might, like I said, get your opinion on, see what you thought.
Well, I don't really believe any particular survey. I think I've said before that I only believe the surveys I like. But I think to be a little more accurate and a little more fair, I only seem to quote from surveys I remember, But it's very easy to get any particular outcome on any given survey. I think numbers, statistics like this are easily manipulated, So if some government agency starts saying that 85% of people who self-identify as black prefer this or that, I mean, I feel like that's just total garbage, because how could that number be real? How could they gauge 80?
Sure.
I just don't believe it. Most things that I hear, I guess,
Right. I think that's a good segue into one of the articles that I have that we're going to talk about regarding statistics, and this is regarding, in particularly, job number, well, not necessarily job numbers, but the unemployment insurance stuff. I recently saw an article on Daily Wire, and it was about this company called Morning Consult, or Consult, and they surveyed 463 out-of-work Americans at the end of June, and 13% of these people that they surveyed said they refused job
I'm
offers.
sorry. What was the percentage?
13% of respondents, and there was 13
refused,
and there was refused job offers because they were making enough from unemployment insurance without having to work.
Now they told the survey this, right? They obviously wouldn't have told this to unemployment or anything, right?
Right, yeah. These people are responding to this company that did this survey.
Okay,
Morning
gotcha.
Consult.
All right.
Right. And what made me kind of want to go ahead and jump to this article when you're talking about numbers and surveys and stuff like that is that the headline of the article is that 1.8 million people turn down job offers because of unemployment insurance.
And that's
And
across the nation,
they,
right?
right, yes. And this company that did the survey estimates that based on, at the time of them doing the survey, there was 14.1 million adults receiving benefits. Yeah, a million adults receiving benefits at the time of the survey. So I'm assuming they're taking the 13% of their respondents, which they asked 463 people.
Right.
Based on that 13% and the fact that there are 14.1 million adults receiving benefits, they estimate the 1.8 refused job offers due to employment insurance. Now, when I first saw that headline, I thought, well, that's a lot of people, and I kind of wondered how they figured that out. And I'm only assuming that's how they got to that number. It was based on the 13% of their respondents and comparing it to the amount of people that were receiving benefits. And I thought to myself, well, even if it's not 1.8 million people, because who knows if that's right or what all, they're really basing that off of. 13% of the 463 people, that's like at least 60, I'm sure. So if 60 people have no problem telling this survey company that they're not working because they make enough money from the government paying them right now, you can certainly imagine there's more than that, even if it's not, well, yeah, there is more than that, but even if it's not the 1.8 million, there's got to be at least half that number, you would think, right? Because there's a lot of people that aren't working.
Well,
We
that's
know there's a lot
immediately
of...
my immediate first thoughts as I was listening to you and taking notes here is I easily figure that you could figure double what they said. Because you're talking about, once again, I do see the tie-in from the last segment because there's still this question of how people have to self-identify, okay? And what
yeah,
about the
okay, I see what
people?
you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, and what about the people who would never tell? What
Right.
if they're abusers of the system and for them to just answer some survey, sure, they could flippantly say, "Yep, I screwed the government over, whatever. I'll do it forever till the day I die." They could put that. But there's somebody out there who thinks, "Oh, that might be on a recording. What if the government found out? I can't say that." No, so they fake it till they die, you know?
Right.
So, yes, I did the math real fast because, like I said, I've been taking notes here. It is exactly 60 out of 463. So, just for funsies, if we doubled everything, I don't have to do any math, but you're talking about like 2.6 million people, who just took advantage of the system. And I almost would be interested. I know there's been a lot of, I don't know if you looked it up or anything. You said you have an article, but I know there are others. I know there are some headlines out there about, they've done a fair number of reviews as to where the COVID funds have gone so far. And they've already cracked some cases. So I think it'd be interesting to go back and look at those headlines of how many people have already been busted for COVID fraud and see how that jives with these kind of projected fraud numbers. That would be really interesting to me to sit here and look at those, the actual versus projected.
Right. Well, the only other thing I had regarding something about this article was that it also talks about how um, all these businesses are putting out incentives to get people to come into work. And you have Joe Biden out there saying, that's a really good thing because it's a workers' economy. Which it's not really a workers' economy if the companies are competing with the government. They're not really competing with each other. I mean, in a sense, they are. They always are. That's how business works. But they're not offering these incentives because, you know, Joe's Pizza Shack wants everybody from Larry's Pizza Pub to come work for him. It's because Joe wants people to come off their asses from home to work. So I guess that's all I had regarding that topic in that article.
I kind of have my own different opinion about the current predicament that we're in, because as a larger backdrop, you have to keep in mind that automation is just right around the corner. And this is one of the things Andrew Yang was running around talking about during his campaign in, the last cycle when Joe Biden won. Is he was talking about how automation was going to take over. No Americans were going to have any damn jobs anymore. Even truckers weren't safe. Just hauling stuff from coast to coast was going to be gone and dead. And I know it's right around the corner. That I've seen footage. They have burger flipping machines. When you go into McDonald's, they already have the iPads they want you to put your order in on. I'm sure in some places it is all automated already, but it's not where I live. Thank God there's still real people, and I don't want it to go away, but I kind of see all this as like a gimmicky sideshow because there's not really manufacturing here. The movement to bring manufacturing back here didn't get off the ground, I feel like. I mean, the whole Trump presidency is dead and gone now. It's yesterday's news. I mean, where are the factories that these people are going to go work in? And I just saw an interesting article the other day about how Frito-Lay right now, they're still an American company. All their workers are on strike, and they're already union. They're all currently, right now as we speak, on strike. They've got good, cushy jobs, and they're striking, man. I can't believe it in a time when, I mean, I just feel like that's the whole attitude is nobody wants to work. And I'm telling you, automation is right around the corner. And I feel like this is a one last go of it to just say, sort of in a weird way, give the people as much money as they can. If somebody comes in and takes a job from you, give them a $3,000 sign-on bonus. Pay them $15 an hour because I think it's going to be less than 10 years before. I mean, I don't know what somebody's going to be doing. Only the dirty jobs, like that television show. Somebody's still going to have to go clean shit out of backed up pipes. But I don't know who's going to be making pencils in America or potato chips or anything.
Well, I think it's coming eventually, but I think it'll be a little bit, definitely more than 10 years.
I don't know. Only time will tell. All right, well, does that move us on to, I don't see an easy transition, but how about does that move us on to the hard topic of January 6th? I think maybe you had a...
Oh, yeah, we can move on to that. I don't know how much we'll cover on this, but I was watching a video, Fox clip with Jesse Waters.
Love him.
And, yeah, he's pretty good. Although, at least I used to make jokes about him being, Bill O'Reilly's little bitch boy when he was on a show in the Waters World segments.
Well, he was, and thank God for Bill O'Reilly and the start he gave Jesse, or we wouldn't have that pleasure.
That's true. But he had Glenn Greenwald on, who I believe was like one of the co-founders of the independent newspaper. I don't think he works for them anymore.
I
I think he's moved
recognize the
on because they're too.
name Greenwald for
Right.
sure.
Yep. But he was originally talking to. He was talking to Jesse Waters about the whole FBI plot with the governor thing, Gretchen Whitmer, and how
FBI. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a
they.
minute. Wait a minute. Get into this. What are you talking about? FBI plot with Governor Whitmer in Michigan?
Yeah. It came out like last week on like over the weekend, I think, maybe Friday, that there were several like FBI informants that had been part of like uh,
A sting?
orchestrating, yeah, kind of like orchestrating the plots that people were trying to do to kidnap the governor. If you remember that.
Well, I do remember the plot to kidnap the governor, but that's been a way back. And I've been on vacation. I haven't been really watching the news that well. So I don't know at all what you're talking about the FBI, and they have a development on that old story.
Yeah, I'll do my best to explain the background of the news story as best I can. But there's like several members in that group that was supposedly part of the plot were FBI informants and or possibly agents. I don't know about agents, but definitely informants. And they were found to have been like paying for dinners and hotels to recruit people to be part of the plot. And from my understanding, that's usually not how an informant is supposed to operate. Usually they just kind of, they're passive, a little more passive. They don't usually try to recruit people into the crime, if you will. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, because traditionally, like let's say before the internet, um, traditionally you would have to participate in a crime if they like asked you to curry drugs or take a hit on kill somebody or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, just sitting around collecting audio, just having conversations, being here at a certain place, just being backup, carrying a gun, just walking around, being part of the mafia, that wouldn't really, push the envelope. But what you're saying, getting online and trying to cast out a big net to catch people up into this plot, that sounds
Mm-hmm.
really bad, I think. I mean,
Right.
surely no agent should be comporting themselves that way.
Right. Well, so Glenn Greenwald and Jesse Waters were talking about that, how, there's a report that the FBI may have been way more involved in it than they should have been. I think that's
Well, I
kind of a
understand.
wrap up.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So then Glenn Greenwald made the point that if the FBI was so entrenched in this plot, he actually made two points. Let me get to the first one. He said traditionally, like, we kind of seen this before, like right after 9/11, how the FBI was going around busting terrorist plots and stuff like that, and it later turned out that they had kind of set them up. And Glenn Greenwald made the point that if there was really a terrorist problem going on, you wouldn't need to orchestrate plots to catch them in. They'd be doing it on their own. And he says this in relation to the fact that the DOJ is considering, white supremacy the most dangerous domestic terrorist threat to our country right now.
Well, you have to remember, I find, this might be too much for air, and you might have to cut this out if you find so, but you have to remember, I mean, I can send you links. This is factual. I can, if anybody cares, the Democrats have done this before. I mean, it might have been Bush and Bush Jr. who pushed the whole terrorism and weapons of mass destruction thing, and I get that. That's its own terrible stain on the American record, and it's its own type of boogeyman, and the whole Patriot Act was a way to abuse patriots, not to aid patriots. It was a terrible act that ended up, biting us all in the butts. But it was the Democrats who instituted the KKK. Okay? So I just see, they talk about Jim Crow 2.0. I see them, Biden, as KKK 2.0. Because this whole running around saying, the white man's out to get you. Huh! It's just like they did in the 60s. Except it's not as uniform. They don't do it in the dead of night. They don't lynch. They don't set front lawns and fields on fire anymore. But they're doing it again. They're going around in a white robe. The white robe of white supremacy. And they're saying, boogie, boogie, boogie.
Well, I mean, the main point that I was trying to get to with Glenn Greenwald in January 6th was if the FBI if the FBI was potentially so involved in the plot with the kidnapping of the Michigan governor, how much did they actually know
about January
6th?
Yes. I totally see how it arches. That's the arch. It all comes back here. It's the redeeming point of the story. Yes, I totally understand. I mean, because you can talk to any Trump supporter and we feel about the same as liberals. I just heard an interview where a liberal book writer, I don't know, she's not a literature type, because I'd probably know her better, but she seems like a Hollywood type. She's worked with Scorsese and some things and whatever. But I was just listening to her talk about how January 6th was like one of the craziest things she's ever seen in her life, and she's seen some crazy things in her life, She could tell you. But that's how I feel too. I'm on the complete opposite side of the fence as her, and January 6th was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. You talk to any Trump supporter, it's one of the craziest things they've ever seen in their life. It was such a depressing day. It is not what was supposed to happen. It is not at all what was supposed to happen, according to anybody. I would have loved to have been up there. I think you and I even discussed going up there. But it would not have worked. There's no way we could have done it. We didn't do it. And thank God, huh? Because it seems like we would have been wrapped up in something much bigger than ourselves. I think it was bigger than Trump.
Right.
I ended up going back. I don't have anything for the audience at this moment as far as a timeline, but I have studied the timeline before. And most people who were there to see Trump were at the rally in front of the White House. And it takes a good couple minutes, a good while for a mob to walk from the White House down to the Capitol. It is a couple of blocks. And what's crazy is they start breaking into the Capitol at like the same moment that Trump is wrapping up his speech. He like hasn't even finished his speech yet when they start breaking in.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen a video of Steven Crowder going through the timeline. He's pointed out the same thing. Trump is still over on the other side of town. I mean, not literally, but he's not. He's still talking.
A couple blocks away. Saying. He's still a couple blocks away when the break-in starts.
Yep, and he has already said to people that they should peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard.
And they were all supposed to do it together. Remember, he said, I might even see you there. I know that was part of it. He was considering going down there himself. But when all that craziness started, of course he couldn't go. That's not what he would have wanted.
Yep.
I don't see how they argue for it.
Yeah, I don't either. But I wouldn't be surprised if I don't think it's going to come out during this sham commission of Nancy Pelosi's, but in another year or two, I wouldn't be surprised if we get more reports about the FBI knowing a lot more than they're leaning on or that they're making us think they know.
Well, it's all very interesting.
Well, to move on from the January 6th topic, we can get to some little bit more relevant news. It's the big scary COVID Delta variant. And I believe you had some news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Well, I heard a report in, decently recently, relatively recently here, that, really stuck out to my brain. The number 85% was what it claimed was the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, period, in regards to the regular COVID strain, the SARS-CoV-2 or whatever it is that we're all so terrified of. So I think you heard that it was a different figure right out of the gate, that it wasn't even as high as 85. But from what I remember, it was 85. And you introduced a concept to me about how, those rates of efficacy decline over time, as you progress forward in time past the initial date of vaccination. The efficacy declines from, let's say 85 to 80 to 70, so on and so forth.
Right.
So what was interesting to me, there was always an appeal to the Johnson & Johnson because of its one and done, sort of idea that you only needed the one, you didn't need boosters, you didn't need a round two. There shouldn't be any question about it, really. You've had the J&J, you're good to go. But now people, those people, those worrywarts out there amongst us are now calling for, I think it's relatively predictable, but they're calling for a booster to the Johnson & Johnson shot because it's not effective enough from the get-go, and according to some, it provides little to no protection from the Delta variant, which everybody's up in arms about. That's on everybody's lips, seems to be, Delta variant. They're considering doing the masks again, as I understand. They're considering doing lockdowns again because of this variant, as I understand. Everybody asks, well, what do you think of the variant? Aren't you nervous about the variant? So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting and slightly predictable that they are now calling for booster shots. And I've said it before right here on our channel. I mean, what's going to qualify as immunity? When will be good enough? If they keep moving the goalpost over and over and over, I've said you could be taking booster shots forever.
Right.
I think it's interesting. I've seen some memes. This is not in any of my notes. This is spur of the moment conversation here, but I've seen memes where they question and they say, where has flu season gone?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me because it's almost like we've moved into a new phase of just studying COVID, and COVID is all anybody talks about, and it seems to me some aspects of the old life have been totally taken for granted, wrapped up into this new language, into this new lifestyle, and people don't see the separation that what used to be the flu is now COVID. And There's nothing you can do or
Right.
say about it. If you test positive on a test, your data on a sheet, you are in the system, you are COVID positive, you're.
Right. Well, you mentioned a minute ago that I pointed out to you in our off-air discussions that I recently just heard that there were studies that found that the vaccines' efficacies diminish over time, and in conjunction with that, I was listening to a video on YouTube from Fox News. It was Brian Kilmeade
Oh,
talking
yes.
with,
I love him.
yes, he's really good. He was talking to Martha McCallum, and one of the big things they were talking about um, is antibodies, and how, and Brian pointed out that most people know where and how to get a active COVID test, if you will.
Yeah,
A
one
test that
that
says if
shows
you
that
have the
you're infectious. This is interesting to
right,
me because I put
right,
this in my notes. I haven't pointed this out to you yet, but it is here in my notes. So you can find a test that shows that you are infectious very easily,
right,
can't you?
yes, yes. But Brian Kilmeade himself says he doesn't know, and he doesn't know very many people that do know where you can go get a test to see if you have antibodies to determine if you have been infected asymptomatically, or to see if you're even carrying the antibodies after you've been infected, which presumably you would be.
Well, which
And
sort of speaks to a sort of immunity, right?
right, yes,
So
yeah,
it
that's one
sort
thing
of
you
is like an
why you'd be testing.
infectious test versus an immunity test. And
Right,
why how come that's not even a question? I mean, if you can be infectious, you can be immune, right? So
yep,
why are we only shooting at the infectious? Why is nobody studying the immune?
right. And one of the things that uh, Martha had pointed out was there's a study that shows from natural immunity after being infected, the immunity lasts at least 10 months. That's all. That's what we know so far. Is at least 10 months,
Oh, yes.
and it's like a 90% or greater, you know, a percentage that you're not going to get reinfected or seriously ill. And at the same time, we're learning now that the
The
vaccines
vaccines.
after
Yes.
six
Like you
months
said, just
are going
juxtapositions the
right.
natural antibodies versus the damn vaccine that I will not take. You find out the natural, just to recover from the virus, to get it and recover, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to get it and, some people have better immune systems than others, get it and be unaffected. That would be your asymptomatic. To get it and not even be affected by it, basically.
Right.
That sort of immunity surely would be much stronger than a manufactured and injected and, sort of a buy it at Walmart sort of protection.
Right. And this is something that just popped in my head again. I forget where I heard somebody talking about it, but um, you know, they're even trying to get people who have been infected the vaccine. Why would you need to do that? Because one, I mean, that could really make somebody sick because they already have the antibodies, and now you're putting a new bit of the virus in them. It's just gonna try to fight it off. I guess the point is they're not even paying attention to the what natural immunity people have and how and they're not putting much thought into studies for antibodies and uh, how effective that is on its own.
Well, plus, if I may put it in there without going too conspiratorial, but you have to question the motives of the people who inject you for free. And
Right.
there was a study out of Yale, I believe it was. I mean, I'd be happy to find it. I'll eat my shirt if I've done something wrong. I'll do the chicken dance or something. I'm not trying to put false information out to the people, but I believe it was a Yale study that showed something like 10 people in a survey had been vaccinated and were positive and asymptomatic for COVID. So they were fully vaccinated, they had COVID-19, they could pass it on to others. So tell me if that's true. If that's true and I'm not making it up and it's not a lie and I didn't read a wrong report or whatever. Still, I believe I've asked this before. I think this question's come up. If you can be asymptomatic and vaccinated, an asymptomatic carrier and be vaccinated, why get vaccinated? I don't understand. Just so you don't have symptoms or show symptoms? Is it purely personal, egotistical, so that I don't cough, so I don't sneeze? Because if you still can carry it on to others, why even do it? I literally don't understand it.
Yep, that's a good point. And lastly, I think before we move on, excuse me, one thing I don't hear a lot of people talk about regarding the Delta variant is the fact that it's only more infectious, as in contagious. It just spreads more, but it's not as lethal, if you will. Or
yeah, it's not as
deadly.
or any more deadly than the original.
Right. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people understand that that's part. Excuse me. That's what happens with variants. They all usually get weaker, as in their effectiveness.
Well,
but they can be more.
I don't know
spreadable.
about all, because you just reminded me of a thought that occurred to me while I was writing this. I mean, I was a classical studies major. I studied Greek and Latin, and the Greek alphabet I have memorized. And what's funny to me, it correlates to our alphabet too, so I'm not trying to be too pedantic or boring or anything like that, but for it to be a Delta or a D variant, doesn't that already suggest, and how come this hasn't been pointed out by our media? Doesn't that already suggest there have been other variants? I mean, obviously there have. It's been in the headlines before. People like you and I who really study the news know that there have been other variants before this one. But what I find to be...
give them geographical names.
Yes, but what I find to be interesting now is to dwell on Delta is almost a meta. Somebody from the literary world would understand that phrase very well, but it sort of is like a meta term. It sort of shows on its face that there's obviously other variants. So to dwell on one almost seems silly to me, because yeah, it might be worse, like you're saying, in regards to this characteristic or that attribute, or maybe it makes me vomit a little bit harder or cough a little bit harder than the other one, or whatever. Maybe it kills people by 0.00001% more than the other. I could understand things like that, but I just think it's a little on the nose. They're talking about how this is a concerning variant, but it's one in a list, obviously. They're using the Greek alphabet and they're calling it Delta, but how long until we get to Gamma? How long until we get to Zeta? Right. I think it's kind of silly to get bogged down on a particular letter when you know. See, that's what I think was kind of awakening about it when, I just had a stray thought, but for it to be Delta out of the whole list, I mean, there's a whole alphabet to go. It's like the hurricanes, right? They'll run out.
Yeah.
They'll start naming them new. They'll come up with a new system. So it's really scary, especially when you listen to those in power. We've said it before right here on this channel. They've even talked about future strains. This will prepare us for the next one. It's really terrifying stuff, in my opinion. Oh,
It is.
so just looking back here at my notes before we move on here, there is one last point in this segment. Believe it or not. So I heard, Reid, and we talked about it privately. I heard that the federal government, the state of California, and, their power, those two in particular that I just mentioned, by power, they've kind of encouraged large businesses and corporations to require people to be vaccinated. And the only way out of being vaccinated, if you choose not to be, is to continually test negative over and over and over. You have to show, I think it's on a weekly basis is what I heard, that you are negative to be able to work. So, I mean, I think this corresponds maybe with something we possibly talked about in the last segment when we talked about jobs and automation. But I'm going to see this as another way of, like, sort of negatively encouraging market participation in terms of jobs. I mean, if you're going to require me to be vaccinated and it's against my belief, I probably am not looking for a job right now. Not with you.
Right.
So I find it interesting that there's so much of an onus and so much on a burden on the job market, on employers, to prove that their employees are negative for this disease. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't that seem like a huge cost to have to be testing weekly? Especially in terms of what we've talked about. I mean, if you have antibodies, you sort of have a sort of immunity, a sort of you're sort of immune, that the true definition of that word. Why would you have to be testing? Whose insurance is going to be billed for it? Mine? I have immunity and they're going to bill my insurance weekly for a PCR test? They're going to bill the company?
Yeah.
Who are they going to bill? They're going to bill the government? Who are they going to bill for this weekly PCR test?
If this is applying to companies in the state of California?
Yes, and the ones who contract with the federal government. There's a federal... I just heard it today, but I just looked today. I've been on vacation. We made the viewers aware of that in the last segment. I've really just started doing most of my research, like in the last 3 days. So, I've missed some things, but as far as I know, that was the case, yes.
Especially if the companies are actually going to have to foot the bill for all that, I mean, companies are already leaving California left and right, so I could just see that speeding it up even more. Possibly.
I just find it absolutely preposterous, and I almost loved, we often, we're two different people, so we often come from two different points of view when we talk about any particular segment or issue, and I was glad we could tie this together because you wanted to talk, something about the idea of why can't you get an antibody test? And, Brian Kilmeade had brought that up in that segment that you had watched with Martha McCallum. And I'm fascinated by that idea too. I absolutely am, because if you could test positive on an antibody test, I would almost want that to be your trump card, my trump card. If I could prove I've had the
Sure.
thing and gotten over it, why do I need to do the song and dance? Why do I need to be afraid? Why do I need to protect myself and test and test and test?
I'd imagine, especially among a group of leftists and liberals, even if you had your card saying you had your antibodies and you're immune, they'd probably like make you an outcast because they'd probably say, "Well, you idiot Rube," to use one of the phrases of some guy on Don Lemon's show. I don't know if you remember that incident, but you got the virus because you're too stupid to go get the vaccine. So even if people did walk around proving, they've gotten the disease, they have their immunity, I don't think that'd be enough for these people who want to push the vaccine so much.
Well, you've seen The Five, right, on Fox News?
I'm familiar with them for sure.
You know how Greg often says permission to make an analogy?
Sure.
Well, I'd like to have permission to curse.
Alright, sure.
If a virus has already entered your body and shit in your system, why would you also choose for some man in a white coat in a laboratory somewhere to shit in your system as well? What's the point? Especially if what he's gonna shit into you comes from the same shit that the virus already shit. So excuse me, pardon me, please. It's just an analogy. Like, I admire Greg Gutfeld, so I do this in honor of Greg Gutfeld. Okay, everybody.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a very, very good point.
I think it is, and plus, I also saw a study from a psychologist. I think you'd find this interesting. I think it was psychologists, not psychiatrists, but they found that people who curse are more honest. On average. Obviously, it's an average. It's a survey. It's a study, and we've talked about how statistics don't matter, but I find it kind of to be true, because if you're just going to say it as it is, you're probably going to curse, I think.
It at least makes sense and probably has a modicum of truth.
Yeah, I mean, the truth ain't always pretty. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. But I only got one last comment regarding the COVID stuff, and it'll actually kind of tie in right to our next topic.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they're so concerned, as we've said, with people getting the vaccine and masking up over this Delta variant and stuff like that. But at the same time, we got monthly 100,000+ migrants coming to our southern border, and very few of them, I would say, and I'm not sure if we even have a way to get these numbers, are vaccinated.
They probably have to self-identify.
Yep, and we've already talked about that. So, and I haven't heard any of these, anybody in the liberal media talk about how we need to also be sending money down there for these poor kids in cages and their parents, make sure they're getting vaccines and giving them masks and stuff so they're not spreading the Delta variant around, or who knows what variant might be down where they're coming from.
Yeah, it might be like the Epsilon.
I don't even know.
The Omicron.
I just think that's another example of course, the and I guess hypocrisy of the left, and I guess maybe it's not just
the whole
hypocrisy,
system.
I'm sure
The hypocrisy
yeah,
of the
whole
whole
thing.
system, man.
Yeah.
We need to go in there. I think you and me ought to do it, Reid. Go in there like Serpentine. You know? Record everything. We ought to just go vigilante. Serpico. It's Serpico.
Serpico.
Yeah. So the last thing is the border. You had a great tie-in about how all these people coming over the border are testing positive out the wazoo for COVID. Well, I want to move us off of COVID a little bit. And I just want to talk about the numbers. So something slapped me in the face today. I believe it was Martha McCallum. I don't want to be wrong, so I'm not going to swear to it. But I heard a segment where they were discussing how there had been over 1 million crossings so far this year. So I'm going to say it again just for effect and clarification, but it's actually more than 1 million border crossings so far in 2021 alone. In this year so far, it's only July 26th as we make this recording. So it got me thinking. She was talking about how the Biden administration will bus these people to wherever they choose. They'll just bus them to whatever city they want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking, well, 1 million people, how big are our cities, you know? I just wanted to know, for an example, if 1 million people came in, is there a city with 1 million people? Could I compare it to? Is there a city with 1 million people? And it turns out that there is, just from my quick research. San Jose, California has just a little more than 1 million people. They have about 1,074,000. I didn't write down the number, but I'm not making that up. They do have a little more than 1 million, and I kind of am just picking a number, but I'm also not making it up. I think they have about 1,074,000 people. I did look at numbers before going to air. I just don't have them all. You'll find as I read some of this that I do have some numbers, but not all of them, okay? So in the more than 1 million category, I did not take down the numbers because they're more than 1 million. But San Jose just makes the list of cities that have more than 1 million people. So, just for funsies, I will tell you that I found a list of the 200 largest cities by population, and it's accurate as of our air date, as of 2021 this year. Could you guess, if I didn't give it away, I may have, but could you guess how many cities in America, this vast country of ours, could you guess how many cities have more than 1 million people living in them?
I'll just say that you did tell me the number before, and I remember it. But I would have probably had guessed slightly less, maybe 5, 6, 7-ish cities have more than 1 million. But you did tell me off air that
It is 11.
what the number was. Yep.
Yes, the number is 11.
And I wasn't surprised.
Well, what's surprising to me, I sort of thought the opposite. There are a lot of big cities, you know, big in name, cities that you know well, that have way less than 1 million people living inside. Like, in some cases, not all, you know, some obviously are more populated than others. But in some cases, they're well-known cities that have low populations. And I was shocked. I almost wanted to do a separate calculation, but I easily saw that this calculation wouldn't really be very much fun. And I think you'll see why when I go through the things that I cherry-picked here out of this data. But I almost wanted to do a separate calculation just out of this list of 200. How many cities with 1 million invaders, if you look at it that way, 1 million foreign invaders, how many cities could you conquer? And I didn't do that, but you could start at the bottom of the list, and I'm telling you, you could probably count about, 7 or 8? You could get up higher than you'd think. You could probably take over about 7. Let's just say 7 for fairness. I don't want to be dramatic or anything. So you could probably take about 7 of the biggest cities out of 200 with 1 million people. And I know I made the point to you. I'd like to make the point to the viewers as I go over some of this. We're going to get a little bit more into the weeds, but my whole thought here was if they're busing these people anywhere, maybe to a theater near you, how much would it take for the area that you know, that you grew up in, that you call home, to be totally unrecognizable? So, we're only looking at the 200 largest cities by population as of 2021. But the first 1 through 11, they go for, could you guess the most populous city? I also told you this off air, but I also think it's very guessable. Anybody could, I think.
Oh, yeah, of course, New York City.
Yes, New York City is number 1. The last that makes the list, I already gave it away, is San Jose, California. They have just above 1 million people. But then, number 12 on the list. So it's number 12 out of the 200 biggest cities in America by population. Fort Worth, Texas, has under 1 million people. And this list, I don't have an exact number for Fort Worth, Texas. I'm sorry, but it's pretty close to 1 million, but it's not 1 million. Okay, it's not 1 million. It doesn't make the list in that regards. So from number 12, Fort Worth, Texas, all the way down to number 200. Number 200 in biggest population is Waco, Texas. There's a lot of big cities that you might recognize that fall into that list. And for these particular cities that I cherry-picked, I have their populations. So I'm not going to read every population for every one. But you, since I have a co-host and a friend and an amigo here, if there's a particular I'm going to read 19 cities. If you want to hear the population of a particular city, ask me. Interrupt me and ask me. The people might want to know too. They might want to know about all of them, and we'll provide the link for where I got this data, the whole list of 200 if you want to find it. But I'm going to go from lowest population to highest population, and I'm just going to point out some cities of interest. And if you want to know the particular population, you tell me, okay?
Sure.
Hollywood, Florida. Salem, Oregon. Providence, Rhode Island.
Well, how many people? Okay, Rhode Island. Providence, Rhode Island. What's theirs?
Only 180,629 people as of 2021.
All right. I mean, they're a small state anyway.
So, just to make my point, I want to make it clear before I just keep reading a list. Imagine if I told you there were 1 million border crossings, Reid.
Right, at least.
Yes, those are the ones we know of.
Yep.
Imagine if 1 million people moved to Providence, Rhode Island. Can you picture it?
Yeah, it'd be a completely different place overnight.
I mean, it wouldn't work if 1 million people moved there overnight. But,
Right.
yes, it would be a completely different place because they'd have to do so much to accommodate for the 1 million people that they didn't have before. But imagine, Reid, as you and I discussed off air, imagine if it was only 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, 500,000. Imagine it was just a piece of this total. And I want you to imagine that with every city. We've only just gotten to Providence, Rhode Island. I have a few more. Next is Knoxville, Tennessee. Tacoma, Washington. Arlington, Virginia, just outside of our nation's capital. Arlington, just because of how close it is to the capital, I'll give this number. Arlington only has 233,000 people, 464. Imagine if they doubled it. Imagine if they sent 2,033, 464 people. Arlington would be the opposite or different. It would not be Arlington. To keep going, Reno, Nevada. Toledo, Ohio. Holy Toledo. St. Louis, Missouri. It has less than 300,000 people, St. Louis, Missouri. It's one of the biggest, they call it the gateway to the West. It's one of our biggest national monuments is in St. Louis. So imagine if it was, they have less than 300,000 people. Imagine if that was taken overnight.
Right.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It hits the list as having less than 300,000 people. Cincinnati, Ohio. Honolulu. Honolulu.
I'm surprised about that.
The capital of Hawaii. Only has 341,000 people. Anaheim, California has less than 350,000. Imagine if 1 million people showed up there. Cleveland, Ohio. New Orleans, Louisiana. You and I talked about this off air. I mean, just imagine, as I've just said over and over, 1 million people moved to New Orleans. Imagine if you wanted to go there and have Mardi Gras. And it's a totally different culture, totally different people. There's no Mardi Gras anymore. Could you imagine?
Yep.
It's that easy. You have 1 million people move there and there's no Mardi Gras. There's only a few more on the list. Sacramento. Las Vegas. And Baltimore, where that Elijah Cummings was from.
Yep.
Baltimore. I'm sorry, I misplaced my notes really quickly. But Baltimore only has 575,000. So if 1 million people went there, the town and city and state that Elijah Cummings knew and loved would not be the same state that he just passed from. Is that really what these liberals want? Is that what Elijah Cummings would want, is to not even know his own neighborhood in 5 years?
It seems like it. And I think what you're saying is definitely a very good point. But it makes me think about even a small place, like the largest city back home in West Virginia, according to Wikipedia, is actually now Huntington. I would have assumed it was Charleston, the capital, but nope. it lost Huntington by like 2,000 people as of 2019. And and it was like 45,000 some odd people in Huntington. And even if you bring in an extra 5,000 migrants, I mean, a place like Huntington, West Virginia doesn't have the means and the capacity to support all that.
Well, that's fascinating to me, and I'm glad you brought it up because it brings me around to a different question. Remember, I put this to you off air, and I almost forgot about it. But I was asking you, I've looked at this a couple of different ways. I was chewing over these numbers, more than 1 million people. How would that correlate? Could I get a city for an example? What kind of a city would that look like if 1 million people, if, in a certain sense, if a whole new city just popped onto the map, what would that look like? And I asked you, Reid, do you remember? I'm sure you'll give me the same honest answer you did before, and you won't change it because I've already put it to you, but, if you were the person in charge, and we don't have to say names, we don't have to say Biden or border czar Harris, we don't have to bring up these people that obviously aren't doing their jobs, but if it was your job, I mean, where would you send these people? I mean, even if you were doing it for good reasons or for bad reasons, how would you do it? I mean, would you send these people just, all to one city at a time until it hit, critical mass, and then find a different city and keep filling cities until they hit critical mass? Or would you just send them 3 people to every city on the map, or disperse them as evenly as you could? Or how would you go about it?
Well, I told you that if I was in charge, I'd try to make it. I would disperse them in the least noticeable fashion, and I'd probably do like a couple in small towns, and then maybe a few hundred in larger cities, so where it might seem like they blend in a little bit more. But I guess that's how I'd pretty much do it.
Well, I just wonder about the question of critical mass. And, I don't know that I'd used that phrase before when we spoke, but it obviously has occurred to me now. I've used it a couple times. But at what point does a city hit critical mass and you move on to the next one? I mean, is that the strategy that you just fill them up, sort of like you're playing a game of Mancala? You fill up all the little divots with marbles, or could there be a more nefarious purpose? Because I could potentially see one.
Sure.
Do you think that the people in power are just playing a nice game of let's keep you safe?
Well, I would say obviously no, because if they really wanted to keep them safe, they'd be doing a better job of making sure they're not risking their lives going through the travel to get here.
An excellent point.
Yeah. So no, I mean, even after that fact, no, I still don't think they're doing it just to, oh, it's humanitarian, we gotta take care of them.
Yes, I don't find it very humanitarian either. And, I don't think it's just because we're conservatives. And, I chewed on this all day. You and I actually even discussed some of this data. We went over what we might talk about in a segment. And this particular point didn't occur to me until we had already started talking. But I think I would be the same as you if I were going to sneak them in. I'm a conservative. If I were going to sneak people in, I'd probably send them as low-key as possible. I wouldn't want to be noticed, I'd be sending people out to the middle of nowhere. 3 people here, 3 people there. No more than 100 people in a particular city, And I'd try to stick to that rule as much as possible. So there's enough cities. You can send 100 people. You could probably never get noticed. But then I started thinking, if I were really a bad guy and I'm sneaking these people in, and I want to, it's not a crisis to me. I want them here. Where would how would this work? And it hit me, the Democrats talk about how bad gerrymandering is and how the Republicans won a bunch of local jurisdictions and they get to draw the maps. And I'm thinking, well, if they're talking about it, it's obviously on their mind. And if gerrymandering is a big political issue, a big complicated political issue, couldn't I just look at a local electorate map and move people into where it would be more comfortable to my political party?
Yeah.
Couldn't I move 10,000 people in here where there needs to be 10,000 people, and move 12,000 people over there where there needs to be another 12,000 people?
Yep. Instead of drawing the map, just fill in the map.
Fill in the map. That's beautiful. It's beautiful, like coloring.
Fill
like
it in
a
with
kid
people.
coloring in a book in a page,
Yep.
It's sick. And it's been going on for a long time. They used to talk about it when we were kids. Clinton started NAFTA. And I think NAFTA had the same effect, didn't it? It just brought in cheap labor, fill in the gaps. You don't have to pay Americans what Americans want to be paid if there's a Mexican sneaking over the border who just wants American currency, and he doesn't care how he gets it. You don't have to have any OSHA requirements when you're paying an illegal. I think we've talked about it in this segment already, but I think that's why we're going to automation. It might have been the last segment when we talked about jobs, but I think that's why we're going to automation, is because the American worker wants, and the Liberal Party has set them up for that. They want $15 minimum. They want this. They want voting rights. They want collective bargaining rights. They want holidays. They want yada yada. The list is longer than what they're willing to work for. They don't want to work, and there are machines that will do their jobs for them. It's only going to be tomorrow. See, we only have a difference of when it's going to hit, you and I. But we both know that the machine revolution is going to be effective. Look at the labor market.
Yep.
I really think this goes back to a different topic, and we can wrap up any moment, but I really think that they're just setting the stage. They're going to say, we offered you $1 million to start a job and you didn't want one. So now we have no sympathy. I think this is just the opening scenes for the next play.
It very well could be.
Alrighty, well, we thank each and every one of our listeners for tuning in. We hope you'll do so again. Reid and I have certainly appreciated your support thus far in our endeavors, and we hope that if you're eking to talk to us, you'll write me, Frank, at contempconserv@gmail.com. And if you want to speak to Reid, I'll pass the microphone to him.
My email address is contempconserv2@gmail.com. contempconserv, the number 2@gmail.com. It will also be in the show notes. And once again, we thank you all for listening. We hope you tune in next time, and please leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcast.